Amen. Good morning, church. Good morning. I like this side a little better. Come on, this side. Good morning, church. Look at it. Even got a wave. Got the little wave going on. I love it. I love it. We were reflecting on a God who rescues and thinking about who God is. And a lot of the Bible reflects on that exact topic. But this time we're focusing a little bit on that issue by looking at the life of what he did through Moses to rescue his people. If you remember last time, a couple times you spent out Moses' life. Moses grew up, was rescued by God, grew up in Pharaoh's court, and then he killed a guy. He killed an Egyptian, absconded, ran off to hide. And while he's there, he meets God, and God reveals what his name is, who he is, what he's all about. And after he reveals himself, Moses, the shepherd, goes back. And we're going to skip ahead a little bit. Moses goes back and says, "Let my people go." And eventually, through several plagues, that's what happens. And he leads them out to the Yam Suf, the Sea of Reeds, or the Red Sea in the King James Version. And he holds up his hand and splits the water, and the Israelites go through. Do you remember that? If you know your Bible story. Have you ever seen The Prince of Egypt? Some of that is true, and the movie. And so they go through this dry land, and then when they get on the other side of the dry land, well, the next problem they have is not being killed by the soldiers, but being killed by starvation. And God provides for them manna, or manna if you're from the South. And we don't know exactly what manna means in Hebrew, really translated as stuff. We don't know what it is, but God provides it. It's enough food to last every day. Every day they wake up and God provides it over and over and over as they go through the wilderness. So God rescues them from political danger. He rescues them from food starvation danger, and he's about to set up something for them. It reminds me of something. I love movies, and a very common literary thing they do in books and in movies, you'll see this often, a common pattern, is it starts out in the movies, and let's say it's a woman, a damsel in distress, the common theme, and she's going on her life, and all of a sudden she's in the midst of this horrible situation, and the people coming in, she's about to be either captured or shot, and then out of nowhere there comes the hero. He's got a British accent, looks like Pierce Brosnan in my mind. And he comes in his three-piece suit, and he rescues her, and he takes her off, and all the while you're thinking, who is this guy? Why was she in danger? Where is she going? And then he finally takes her off and says, "I've been sent by Her Majesty the Queen, and now you're in the inner British layer of 007 or whatever it is." And he said, "Why me? Why'd you rescue me?" "Well, because we've got a mission for you." "Why you?" "At birth, you were twins and you were separated, and we need this blah, blah, blah." "I don't know how to do that." "Well, I'm going to train you." All right, you've seen these it's a common motif in a lot of movies. That's kind of what happens with the Israelites. They're in distress. It's a horrible situation. And out of nowhere, this guy comes in, and the hero of the story isn't Moses. It is God, Her Majesty the Queen. God comes in as the hero to save them. He sends a mediator. Moses sends them out. They just make on the other side. They're like, now what do we do? Now we're starving. Here's some food. God takes care of that. And he leads them back to the lair, to the spot where they're going to find out who did all this. Why was I rescued, and who did it? And they find out. They take them all the way back to the mountain where Moses first started out. And it's the exact same mountain that was at when Moses asked God, "How do I know you're with me?" Remember what God said? He said several things. One was, when you get back to this mountain and look back, you'll know. Guess what? That's what happened. They get back to the mountain to find out that's the kind of God that he is. In Exodus chapter 20, if you have your Bibles, you turn to Exodus chapter 20 with me. Exodus 20, verse 1. So we're skipping ahead again. He's rescued them. He comes all the way to this point, and God is about to set up a theocracy. Theos means God. Theocracy means God rules. They weren't that common, but they happened. The idea is that God rules through the priestly class, and that's exactly how, and a king that God established. So you know the word democracy. Demos in Greek means people. Democracy means the people rule. Theocracies are God rules. This sounds controversial, but America is not a theocracy. We are not ruled by God. It's a republic, and that's a very different thing. But anyway, we're not ruled by God, but that's what God was about to establish, a theocracy. And he's going to bring Moses and the Israelites back up to the mountain and says, "Let me introduce you to the God who just rescued your rear end." And he's going to set up this thing called law. And he starts out by something we typically call the 10 Commandments or the Decalogue. Do you have it? Verse 1. And God spoke all these words. He said, I am Yahweh your God. I am the Lord, that caps lock. I am Yahweh your God. That means that's his covenantal name he revealed to Moses with the burning bush. Remember that? I am Yahweh your God, who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. I did that. I did that. I'm the same God you're talking to. I'm the God who did that. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an image in the form of anything in heaven above or on earth beneath or in the waters below. Don't bow down to them or worship them. I am Yahweh your God. I'm a jealous God, punishing the children for the sin of the parents, the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments. What it means there is if you brought in a false idol, I'm going to come back to this later on, the punishment has to do with the family who lived together. In one tent, Israelite, they would have had up to 4 generations. And so what he means is if the father of the household brought in a false god, the whole family's got to worship that god. The point is, you'll corrupt all of them and all of them are going to get punished in a theocracy because you're all in this together. So he's not saying future people who aren't even born yet. He means the people in your household because that's what they did. You worship as one big family together. In a theocracy, the families aren't together. Verse 7, you shall not misuse the name of Yahweh your God, for Yahweh will not hold anyone guiltless who misuses his name. Remember Shabbat, or Sabbath day, by keeping it holy. Holy means set aside and distinct in God's realm. It means in God's realm. 6 days you're going to labor, do all your work. But on the 7th day is a Shabbat to the Yahweh your God. On it you shall not do any work. Neither you nor your son or daughter, your male or female servants, nor your animals, not even foreigner residing in your towns. Nobody. For in 6 days Yahweh made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, but he rested on the 7th day. Therefore Yahweh blessed the Shabbat, or Sabbath day, and made it holy. And in Judaism, Shabbat, or Sabbath, is always Friday night to Saturday night. It still is. It always will be. Always will be. And that's just like a preamble. He goes on and gives 6 more commandments, and then he gives a big fat law code. Now, law codes, most people hate to read them. I mean, quite frankly, they're a bunch of don'ts. Don't do this, don't do that. They sound kind of arbitrary. But when you study law codes in the ancient world, it's amazing how it elucidates what were the purposes. In the ancient world, there are 7 other known law codes that are like the one we have in Exodus and Deuteronomy. 7 different ones. This is the most well-known one here, the Akkadian, the Law of Hammurabi. And when we study, who gives a rip? Well, I care because I care about how God inspired the authors to write the Bible. And God wanted to speak to those people a long time ago in a way that they would understand. I think that was very cool of God, very loving of him. And he spoke to them in the way they'd understand at this stage in history by giving them a law code. And we learned that law codes or Torah is a way to establish God's covenant. And so they thought it was a binding covenant for the nation of Israel under Yahweh. And by agreeing, they form a theocracy. I'll be your God, you'll be my people. And if you sign this covenant, you might say, if you keep it, if you agree to it, I'm going to be your God. We go into a binding covenant relationship. It's a special kind of binding relationship, but there is one binding relationship that reminds me of that, and that is a wedding. At a wedding. Now, arguably, what's the most important part of a wedding? Don't say the wedding dress. The vows, thank you. I agree. I think it's one of the most important parts. As a certain person who does a lot of officiating, a lot of weddings, it's a very, very important. And the vows are the part of the ceremony, obviously, where we tell each other the things we're committing to. Now, if you listen carefully to a person's vows, you'll learn a lot about the person. I do a lot of premarital counseling. It's very common for the couples to look at me, sometimes very scared, and go, will you write them for me? I don't know what to say. Well, I'm not marrying you. You better come up with it. No, sometimes they don't. They know exactly what they're going to say. Other times they say, I just want the traditional ones, and there are different ways to get at, and that's fine. But I encourage every single couple is think very carefully what you are committing to and what you're requiring of your spouse. Think very carefully. Pray. I say that early on in the process of premarital counseling, so they have weeks or months to really think and pray about it. If I were to go back 18 years ago in our wedding, I would have done it differently. I'm an old man now, and I know a lot more about how marriage works and my own failings, and I would have committed to different things, better, more rich things that I would have really understood in more maturity And of course, I know I do the same thing in 10, 20, 50 years from now. Hopefully, they were still married. Man, I would have done it differently, 50 years ago. But why do we do wedding vows? Think about that for a second. When I had wedding vows in my life, it demonstrated at least three major things. One is it demonstrated I'm married just to her. And to symbolize those vows, I wear a wedding ring. This doesn't make me married. It demonstrates I'm married. The vows demonstrate I'm married to her and nobody else in the world. It legitimizes our relationship. It means it shows the world there are things I will do with her that I won't do with anybody else, and vice versa. So it means that it legitimizes, I'm just married to her. It also demonstrates what kind of person I am. I didn't do this, but had I had a vow that said, I will never ever lie, or do not ever ever lie, it would have demonstrated I'm honest, or at least I value honesty. It would have said a lot about me by the vows I had, or the things I prohibited. So it tells the world we're married. It demonstrates a lot about me. And third, it says a lot about what I expect of her. If we're in marriage together, I expect you to be faithful. Do not be unfaithful. It means I value fidelity. I value faithfulness. And she would say the same thing back. So it says a lot of those kinds of things, those three things. And in the ancient world, that's exactly how law codes function. They function the exact same way. When we read these kind of texts, it demonstrates that's the real God amongst his people. He's the real God amongst that people. That's my God and my people. We're in this together. It's like a very close bonded marriage relationship. And it reveals God's character, and it tells me how those people are supposed to behave. In today's sermon, we're just reflecting quickly on particularly what it tells us about God's character. Before we move on, two very important points. When God gives the commandments and God gives this big law to the ancient Israelites, what's staggering when you compare that to the ancient world is that God gets nothing out of the deal. God doesn't make a covenant with the people because he needs something from them. For example, when I had children, my wife and I had children. I didn't have them alone. I was living miraculous. When we had children, we weren't child deficient, like vitamin D deficient, had to go out in the sun. We were like, I'm missing kids and I need them to complete my life. That's not why we had kids. We had kids because someone had to clean the house, Chelsea, and that's why God wanted us to. We want to just extend our love. We want to extend our love. God doesn't need anything from us. He's not universe deficient, or David or Chelsea or William deficient. Everything he does from the covenant with his Israelites and then through Jesus, it's just a gift. It's for our good. It's just for our good. That's how good he is. There's no better good thing than to have a relationship with the greatest conceivable being. There's no greater good. There's nothing higher than that. And secondly, because that is the greatest good, that covenant he gave with Israel, it doesn't save them per se. They can't earn it. They're not earning their wedding ring. It's just a grace gift. Just a grace gift. Well, let's look very quickly and think, is there anything like he says to the ancient Israelites in the New Testament? Look again in verse 2. What does he say in verse 2 to the ancient Israelites? What does he say there? I am Yahweh your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. The first thing God establishes, listen, before he forms his covenant and forms the vows of the marriage relationship, the first thing he does is remind them, I'm the one who rescued you, not those other gods, and certainly not yourself. You were stuck. I think on purpose, between that and the next first commandment, it's a reason why God starts out with that. Don't ever forget, and the vows we're about to make, who I am. I rescued you. In the New Testament, we have at least one major thing that occurred that demonstrates God the Father can be trusted. And his name is, you're in church, you can say it, Jesus. The fact that Jesus comes, he teaches about and ushers in the kingdom of God. He takes upon himself the sins of the whole world on the cross. He's raised to new life. He's ascended into heaven. This event demonstrates he can be trusted. He's good. I mean, think about it a different way. If Jesus came and robbed people and stole, and then he's resurrected, you go, man, he seems like a villain. That's not the kind of Jesus we get. He's not a villain. God didn't betray people. He didn't say, I'm going to rescue you, I'm going to heal you, and then he changed his mind. Pull a fast one on him. He duped him. He didn't do that. When you think back on your own life, when all the stuff hits the fan, and you're wondering if God really cares at all about you and he's made any kind of covenant with you through Jesus, particularly if you're a Christian, what do you go back to as that ground zero? Some people go back, well, I was raised in church when I was 4 years old. That was a long time ago, and they can't think recently. And for those people, my encouragement is, at least you got the story of Jesus, and that's a fact. But what else since then? What else since then could there be that God can be trusted? The other day I was at the gym, and there's a guy that I'm friends with. He's an atheist, and we were talking. He's going through a hard time in life, and I said, how you doing today? It was a day or 2 or 3 after this tough thing has happened, a real tough thing. And he said, I'm a little better, but I said, I've been asking over and over, what can I do for you? What can I do for you? And right then he said, well, I don't know, just think positive thoughts for me. And I said, shoot, I can do better than that. Since God is real, and we've had faith talks. I said, since God is real, I pray for you. And he starts to laugh, and he said, well, if you feel like you need to do, I said, yeah, I do, because he's good. He can be trusted. He's a good God. Now, if we had time and weren't in the gym and sweaty and walking past each other, I would have said, let me tell you some more stories to tell you how I know for a fact he can be trusted. The God I know is good. And that's what God is trying to tell the Israelites. Before I form this covenant, think for a second before you get confused or you're not real sure, I'm the one who rescued you. Please don't forget that. Please don't forget that. Sisters and brothers, please don't forget that. He's not abandoned you. He's not forgotten you. And if you and I don't think back and be deliberate about those times when God demonstrates he can be trusted, we'll forget. Evil will convince us otherwise, and hard knocks are going to convince us otherwise, and we'll say, who cares? Don't forget. He goes on from there, and he gives 4 commandments that talk about primarily who he is. He says, don't have other gods before me. This is a way of telling them in a negative way, but they are to recognize God alone has sole divine authority. He is it. He does not share his authority or power with anybody else. If you grew up in Christianity or even Judaism, or even if you're not, you're in those environments, you go, yeah, I get it. But in their context, everybody believed that there were many gods. Everybody were polytheists. And they shared their power with each other, and they fought each other, and they had sex with each other. They did all kinds of stuff as the gods. They sometimes took votes on issues. I mean, they all went together in community. And then comes Yahweh saying, that's not how I roll. You will not, I do not ever share authority with anybody else. And if you think that about me, you're wrong. So when you worship other gods alongside me, you're confused. You got your wires crossed because you think I'm like those gods, but I'm not. I don't share my authority with other gods, and I don't share it with you either. And that's exactly what Jesus is getting out of Mark 8:34. When he says, you want to be my disciple, you must deny and pick up your cross to follow me. Deny yourself, pick up your cross to follow me. I don't share my power. I don't need your help. I don't need anything. Whatever I do for you, I do lovingly and kindly and freely, but I don't share it. And no other gods should ever get that focus. Nothing. No authority, no boss, no power, no job, no schooling, no nothing. Nothing. I don't share it. I'm above it all. I'm above it all. Then he says, don't make yourself a carved image. Well, who cares about that? I'm not really tempted to make carved images. I'm not, Chelsea, I'm not. But they were, and the reason why I was, is because everybody did it. Everybody, Egyptian, Canaanite, everybody thought that the gods that existed wanted to mediate their presence through a thing. So they would take water bottles just like this. Just kidding, but not really. They would take water bottles. They would go out to the trees and winnow down these images and idols, sometimes small to put in their homes, because we have found them, little shrines they put in their houses of Baal and whatever. Other times they're really big statues. And these big statues, these carved images, will be in the shapes of the gods, usually in shapes of animals if they're Egyptian, but usually right animals. And the idea was that when you're around the presence of that idol, like imagine this cross were a big idol, but it's not. And when you get closer, you're getting closer to that divine presence. And you're going to be real sweet to that idol. You pour oil on it, give it food and drink. The idea is you're being sweet to the idol of the god, and the god will be sweet to you. Scratch his back, it'll scratch yours. And it's a way of mediating the presence. And they sometimes believe that if you had different idols set up in different cities, the god was kind of chipped away in different parts of himself or in different camps. God says, nope. That's not how I am. I do not mediate my presence by things. The reason why is because you can't manipulate me. You can't rub my feet because I don't have them. You don't make images because you can't do things to it expecting me to come back and scratch your back. It doesn't work that way. And in a context where everybody thought that about the gods, they got to be sweet to the gods, there's conditional love, conditional giving back and forth. Yahweh says, I'm not like that. And to prove it later on in time, Jesus himself will come and say, again, I'm not mediated by stuff or things. Things don't mediate me. God mediates himself. So the God-man Jesus comes down and says, I will mediate God's presence. And when I reside in you, you'll know it. But don't make carved images. Don't get it messed up thinking that you can control me. You can't. I'm free. Then he says, don't take the name of Yahweh in vain. Now, when I was a kid growing up, that just meant don't say the cuss word GD. It's kind of narrowed down to that. Let me just be honest. It came down to that one commandment. And so if you said it, time froze. He said that. It just became the horrible. Well, that's partly what's going on. But in this context, people use the names of the gods to get people to do it their way. They would make oaths in court, and they would do it for their benefit. They would say, if I'm lying, God strike me dead. Have you ever said that before? Maybe not lately, hopefully, but maybe when you're a kid, you say that kind of stuff. God's saying that's not the kind of God I am. You cannot use my name for your benefit. Anytime we try to use religion or religious affiliation for money, like it sells good books, or makes us have certain friends maybe we didn't want to have before, or we try to fit in with it. Anytime we ever use anything that has to do with God to establish our kingdom, we are misusing the name of God. We're using it in vain. Every time we try to do something, every single time, we use God or God's work in a way that tries just to benefit ourselves, we're using it in vain. Now, we can do it on accident sometimes, but here he's saying on purpose. Understand, I'm the kind of God. You can't do it that way. I'm not a magic rabbit's tail. And last he says, keep one day a week where you remember that you're not in control. In the ancient world, when they thought of rest, when the gods rested after they created, they didn't think, I made this big thing and I'm going to take a nap. I'm tired. What they thought of rest was much more like controlling over something you've built. In the first service, there's a couple that comes here, a young couple, and the husband builds cars from kits. I mean, legitimately, they'll mail in all the car parts, engine. I've helped him unwrap one of them. And he has this little garage, and he undoes the boxes and reads a big fat manual and just says, put that thingy here. And he builds the car. He built his wife a car. It's amazing. It looks amazing. And I said, were you nervous when you first started on? This is a few years ago. And he goes, yeah, I was nervous. And of course, it hasn't blown up since and ever. But it starts up. It's amazing. And I thought a couple times when he first showed me, I thought, the first day he turned that thing on and got in and it was all ready to go and sat down, biblically we would say he rested. He was no longer working on the engine, as it were, in the car, but also he's now in control. God said it's like that for his Israelites. There needs to be at least one day a week where you don't worship productivity. You're not a slave to getting things done. Back then, they didn't have weekends. They went on work cycles, usually in Egypt for 10 days. And later on, the Romans had a similar thing. And then here comes these weirdo Jews who said, no, there's one day a week. We work 6 days a week, but there's one day. We don't work. We don't go to work. We don't go to work. Well, now we have a weekend. There's 2 days of work. I don't work. Well, kind of as a pastor, but I'm off the clock, you might say. But back then, that was the big point. No one did that. No one did that. You knew when you met a Jew because on that day, because Friday night sunset to Saturday sunset, they didn't work. The laundry didn't get done and the crops didn't get taken in. Now, in the New Testament, Jesus doesn't come back and say, you all got to keep the Sabbath too, because the early Christians, the Jewish Christians probably did, but the Gentile Christians didn't. We know that from 1st, 2nd, 3rd century evidence. But the fact still remains that what he's forming a theocracy is, and I still think it's very much true today, we don't worship that. We don't worship having a big fat 401k. It's one of the great temptations of the American culture for us to be workaholics and give and give and give and try to build up. And Shabbat, Sabbath rest says, no, we worship God and we'll get to sit back and enjoy what he's done. If I were to take these negatives and turn them and say it in a positive way, I may say it like this. I put all this together. God is supremely powerful and free, supremely powerful. There are no other gods before him. He's not married. He doesn't have a cohort by himself, and he's free. He doesn't need permission from anyone. That's good news. He's never coerced. He's never manipulated. Which is the people who intend harm for you, they can't manipulate God to get him to do what they want against you. He only does the right thing. He can't be coerced or manipulated or betrayed. He loves, he gives, he enacts justice, and he rescues perfectly and freely. It's just for our benefit. And we have the privilege of enjoying what he's created. All the time, at least once or twice a week, we get to sit back and go, thank you, God, for all that you've done. Have you ever given to a person and you felt guilty and that's why you did it? Moms can be the worst at this. But you ever felt you gave you guilty, it felt gave a different time when you didn't feel guilty, you felt it was just a free gift. I just wanted to help. You ever felt the difference between those two before? I sure have. When you give freely out of love, you're just saying, I'm not doing it for there's no strings attached. I don't feel guilty. I just want to help. I just want to serve and give. That's how God feels all the time. He just wants to give and love. So we see in these short verses, stay with me, that God is trying to express to his people, act like you know who I am. I'm not like those other gods. You can't control me. You can't manipulate me. Whatever I do freely and lovingly. And I want you to act like that.